I need some help here. First of all, it's really good to see a lot of old friends and colleagues here. Anytime we can get an event together like this and just see old friends and share ideas and stories, it's a special time. I thought what I would share with you guys tonight is during my, I'll call it relatively early careers at Pratt, there were a lot of lessons learned, both personally and I think with the company. The first one that's on the chart here is obsolete your prized product, which back in the 70s, 80s was obviously the JT8D, as Dan just explained. Because if you don't obsolete the product you think is doing you the best good, somebody else is going to do it for you. And I think we've seen that experience, and we'll talk about it. So, as Dan said, the JT8D was one of the most successful engines in aviation history. We used to power over 70% of the narrow-body single-aisle fleet. And as Dan said, it was 737s, 727s, DC-9s, MD-80s. Pratt & Whitney owned the narrow-body market. We produced over 14,750 engines all the way up through the 1980s. This was an amazing accomplishment, and Dan, thank God, was doing everything he could to keep those things flying, which I would call as sort of a harvest strategy. You know, keep making money on what you've got. But one of the things you got to do is start thinking about what's next. You know, what the hell, what are we going to do? Because things occur very quickly in this industry. Today, the CFM56 powers over 60% of that single aisle market that we used to own. They have over 33,000 units delivered to date and thousands more on order. It's phenomenal. The V2500, thank God, has delivered more than 7,800 engines, and as of the mid-2025, we've delivered more than 2,400 aircraft powered by the GTF. So what happened? What happened to make this big change in the aviation industry that essentially took Pratt down as the #1 producer? How did Pratt go from powering over 70% of the market to less than 40%, I would say, today, despite developing two engines, the V2500 and the GTF, in that time frame? My position, this is just me now, I contend it was the result of a loss of focus on our core single-aisle market and business strategy. And we encountered both technical and development challenges along the way, as a lot of you know, not just in the V2500, but also in the GTF. So that's my big premise as the major lesson we've learned, in my opinion, in the past 20 years. Second thing we need to do is we needed to learn how to partner with the enemy. Now I'm talking about Rolls-Royce, because that's how we started with the V2500. Bob Rosati, who was honored tonight, thank God, reached out, went to Rolls-Royce, went to all the other partners in the V2500, and convinced them that something needed to be done to compete in this narrow-body market segment. And they proposed the V2500. Now, the 1980s, as Dan had pointed out, were a very busy time in commercial aviation history. Boeing was in the process of certifying the 767 and the 757 aircraft, both airplanes Pratt was on. Airbus was certifying the A320 and started development of the A330 and the A340 aircraft. And Boeing was certifying the 737 classic aircraft, unfortunately, re-engineering it with the CFM56. That's a lot of activity, a lot of development, a lot of money being spent in commercial aviation. So IE was formed by Bob and the team to develop the V2500 to compete with CFM at that point on the A320, rather than giving them sole source. So to try to sort out everything that was going on in the market and review our business strategy and deal with all of this activity, as a lot of companies do, Pratt hired a consultant. Yeah, we hired a consultant. Some of the conclusions that came out of this consultancy were one, the current hub-and-spoke route system used by all the airlines was going to be replaced by point-to-point. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that meant that it was not going to be narrow-body, single-aisle market aircraft in big demand. It was going to be wide bodies, taking people from city A to city B. That was a conclusion. That meant there was going to be a higher demand for wide-body aircraft and therefore higher thrust engines. That's starting to go into the strategy. Number two, oddly enough, all engines cost $2 million to make. Not quite sure where that came from, but that's what they said. All engines cost $200 million to make, but higher thrust engines command a higher price on a dollar per pound of thrust basis, and therefore you're going to have more profit with these higher thrust engines. So this led to a strategic and technical focus on wide-body engines, despite the fact that really our business is about spare parts sales and maintenance now, right? And how do those spare parts sales get generated? By engines and airplanes putting on lots of cycles and burning up parts. I think the GTF knows that right now, right? You're in the middle of that. So what happened was the focus became largely within Pratt & Whitney and all the program management, technical, marketing organizations, kind of a focus on wide-body engines, big thrust engines, and that sort of stuff. And the other part of it was we realized that sales of these engines, even though they had higher prices, as Dan sort of pointed out, we got about zero for the engine we sold, and we had to wait for a long, long time before our spare parts sales were going to kick in. There were no margins on the sales of commercial jet engines. Fortunately, IAE was not viewed, unfortunately, IAE was not viewed favorably because of the culture. It was a bit of an orphan, or somebody expressed it as the red-haired child. I don't know where that came from. But it was a bit of an orphan at Pratt and Rolls-Royce because it was taking resources and kind of competing with everything else going on, and it was not on big airplanes. So partnering with the enemy also had other issues, like issues of control. IE was split up into many different organizations, either headed by Pratt or headed by Rolls-Royce, and they had to report back to their parent company as to what was going on, what they were doing. And the parent company, quite frankly, said, don't bother me too much with that shit that's going on at IAE. I mean, I got other big things to do. So despite the fact that it was considered going to IAE was kind of a bad career move, I took a job because Rob's father convinced me to come over to IAE, and my job was to go out to Seattle and convince Boeing that the V2500 needed to be on the 737 to make that aircraft successful and compete with the CFM56. I'll have to say I failed. After about a year of doing product installation studies, lots of teams coming out, we were successful in getting Boeing to consider a stretch of the 737 Classic. It was a 737-400. The baseline engine that airplane studied and looked at what its potential was the V2500. So Boeing was finally softening up a little bit. Well, maybe the V2500 can really help us here on our 737 strategy. So there was a big meeting. Pratt & Whitney, president of Pratt & Whitney, some Pratt & Whitney senior management people, the Pratt & Whitney IAE folks, Bob Rosati, they all came out, and I had the privilege of giving a presentation about the V2500 on the 737-400. What a great airplane engine combination that was going to be and what did we do. The only issue was Boeing never pays the cost of putting a second engine on their airplanes. If you're the second guy on, you pay the bill. Whatever Boeing's certification bill is and flight test costs and all that stuff, you pay. And so Boeing presented to us at this meeting $75 million. It's going to cost IAE $75 million to certify the V2500 on the 737, and probably it would have been the 737-400 that we started on. Now, there was a lot of uncertainty going on at the time. Maybe some of you remember. Boeing was looking at a 7J7 with an unducted fan GE engine on the back of it. There was a 7-7. In fact, even IE proposed an geared engine for that, geared fan. So there was some uncertainty as to, the whole future of the 737. So what happened? The Pratt & Whitney president at the time said, $75 million, that's too much. We're not willing to pay you $75 million to certify on the 737. Now, from my point of view, having been there for a year and a half, busting my ass to get us to this point, $75 million to Pratt & Whitney as a 30% partner was $23 million. As far as I was concerned, that was cheap, and I didn't understand why we weren't going to get certified on that airplane and start that program. But the fact is, it didn't happen. We had a golden opportunity, in my mind, to get on the 737, and strategically, we turned it down. Why, I contend? I contend because we had so much going on at Pratt on the wide-body, large engine market, we didn't want to make the investment. So I returned to Pratt East Hartford in late '86, and eventually was assigned to set up what was called an IE war room in the old schoolhouse. This was about mid-1987. At that point, the V2500 program was in real trouble. We had a high compressor that was way off its efficiency targets. Each component had its own efficiency goal in the program. It was way off that. It didn't have any surge margin. And in fact, we couldn't even get the damn engine started in some of the few first tests where we had to drill holes in the rear compressor cases just to get this thing to light off. This was all within 8 months of the time we had to certify the engine for the A320 flight test program. That's a pretty compressed time frame. Also, what happened, have any of you heard of the V2500 Superfan? Anybody? The V2500 Superfan was something proposed by IAE to Airbus as another application of the V2500 to go on the A340. Now, this meant that the A340 could possibly compete with twin-aisle aircraft on a fuel burn basis, range basis, that sort of thing. Because this machine was a very high bypass ratio geared fan with variable pitch fan blades. Pretty sophisticated, came out of the Pratt Advanced Programs Group. And IE made that proposal in about mid-year in '87. And Airbus actually took it to the customers. One big customer was Lufthansa, and they had orders for that. Now, I'll have to say, given the trouble with the high compressor, just certifying the current V2500, and then taking on the technology risk associated with the gear at this point, we're talking the mid-'80s now, the gear and a variable pitch fan, Pratt & Whitney threw it in his hands and said, we can't take that risk. We don't know how to do that. So, what happened? We had a major, again, another senior management meeting, this time at Pratt & Whitney, with Pratt & Whitney president, senior Pratt folks, and the senior IE Pratt & Whitney people to discuss what are we going to do with the V2500 program after all this. They were really thinking of killing the program. I can tell you that's how serious it got because of the big risk in actually being able to certify on time. Lucky me, I was the facilitator for this meeting and the presenter. Let me just make it short. The conclusion of the meeting was the V2500 had to be saved. And why was that? Because we could not let CFM go unchallenged in the single aisle market. So I fondly call it, and it became the block strategy. We got to certify the V2500. We got to get this A320 competitive. And we've got to look for more applications for the V2500. Cancellation costs would have been horrendous. And though we had some ideas about what we might be able to do to substitute the V2500, nothing was viable. So quite frankly, the V2500 was it. Now, happy ending, right, to the story? Rolls-Royce came up with the miracle of the 95B high compressor. You may not have heard about this before. But Rolls-Royce, 8 months prior to certification, was running at least 5 high compressor aero rigs to try to get something that actually performed and did what they had signed up for the program. Well, son of a gun, they pulled through. Pratt & Whitney Engineering had taken over the engineering at IE at the time. Rolls-Royce had it before. That was one of the splits. And fortunately, Pratt & Whitney Engineering was also a good change in the program to make sure that we did the right things technically. Now, that meeting was a very decisive meeting. And unfortunately for me, because I had so much history with the V and baggage, I'll call it, I told the Pratt president during that meeting that he screwed up. He made a major mistake. Not agreeing to pay the cost that Boeing wanted to certify the V on the 737 was a mistake because it would have really cemented our block strategy. We would have had two engines, Vs on both the 737 and the A320 today, and wouldn't that be a nice thing if that happened? What that led to was actually CFM getting more exclusivity on their future product line and stuff. Now, as the commercial says on TV, that wasn't smart for me to say that, but I did get a good deal on auto insurance. The next day, the executive vice president of Pratt came to my office and said, Steve, we like you a lot. We think you're very capable, but we need to pull you off this program of looking at the V2500 and that sort of stuff. So we're going to banish you to advanced programs and engineering. So that's where I was sent, so that they didn't have to listen to me anymore. But what was learned in this transfer, just to tell you that, you know, sticking to your guns and really deciding that, you know, what the right thing to do is, if you want to be successful, you have to do that. And by the way, your customers want you to be successful. So my assignment to work in advanced programs turned out to be not a career setback, as you would think, but quite frankly, an opportunity to both learn and grow. My first project was to take a unducted fan nacelle, a model, put it underneath an A320 wing, and run it in a test cell at British Aerospace in Bristol, England. Now, this was to sort out the drag issues and other issues with our advanced geared program, very early, very, very early in the stages. So I was headed to Airbus to meet with Jean Roeder and his team, who were the advanced airplane program group at Airbus. Now, you would think, surprisingly, why does Airbus even want to talk to us after the A340 geared fan fiasco at IAE? I have to tell you, they really loved that concept. They loved that engine. So they were willing to help us run this program, collect data, improve our technology or whatever, in getting this, perhaps someday, this geared fan on the A320. So, put the presentation together, thought I was going to have a good reception, flew to Toulouse. Jeff Suter, our Toulouse program office guy, met me at the airport. Said, Steve, we've had a change of plans. And I'm thinking, oh shit, here we go. He said, Bernard Ziegler, the senior vice president of engineering and flight operations at Airbus, wants to meet you. Now, you know, guys, I'm a middle manager, labor grade. I'm 51. I'm not sure what that is today at Pratt, but I'm kind of a nobody. And I got the senior vice president of engineering and operations at Airbus wanting to meet with me at his country club in the Toulouse countryside. Okay, well, Jeff, I got to take a shower. You know, I just got off an airplane. I went and I took a shower, jumped in Jeff's car, and we drove. And we drove. And we drove. I don't know where it was in the Toulouse countryside, but it wasn't anywhere near Toulouse. So we get to this place. It's a gorgeous country club, big pool. We walk out to meet with Bernard Ziegler, and there's Bernard sitting all by himself at a table, waiting for me to show up. So I said, Bernard, I'm Steve Heath, very happy to meet you. I'm not sure why you want to meet me today, but I'm honored that we're here. He says, Steve, no, it's very important that I meet with you because I need to tell you a story. He said, when I was a young performance engineer at Airbus, and we're looking at the A320 aircraft and what can we do to make this airplane remarkable, even better. he said to me, we wanted to put fly-by-wire side-stick controller in a commercial airplane for the first time, and the A320 was going to be the airplane to do that. Bernard said, so I was given the responsibility to present to Roger Bataille, who was the president of Airbus at the time, the proposal to do this. I was very concerned, very nervous. You know, this is a brand new technology, a brand new thing. So Steve, we had this meeting, we went through the airplane program, what was happening, and it was my turn to stand up and present my presentation. So I gave my presentation. I said, here's the fly-by-wire system, side-stick controller. These are all the benefits it will have for our customers. Less fatigue, better reliability, better performance, all of these wonderful things. So I gave my presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I look around, everybody's quiet, and Monsieur Bataille, he stands up and he says, Monsieur Ziegler, very good presentation. One problem, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. All these reasons you give me for doing this, this is not the reason Airbus will do this. Airbus will do this. And the reason we will do this is because we represent advances in commercial aviation that no one else will do. We represent advancing the state of the art in our business. That's why we will do fly-by-wire on the A320, because we want to take the lead in this industry. So Bernard says to me, this is after a speech, you know, I got stuff dribbling down, you know, and I'm saying, oh, wow. And he looks at me and says, so Steve, you must push. You must be successful. The geared turbofan engine, high bypass ratio engines, that is the future of your propulsion systems in the aviation industry. You must ensure that this program goes forward and gets through. You must lead the industry in this technology. I didn't know what to say. That was a hell of an assignment given to me by one of the leading people in the aviation industry. That was inspiration. That was kind of what drove me from that point on out in support of both the V2500 and the GTF. That eventually led to flying a PW4000 Cord geared fan on the A340. That was with Airbus. Airbus wanted us to be successful. That is what we focus on. We focus on doing the right thing and advancing the state of the art in our industry. And that is the charge that we had as retirees when we worked at Pratt, and that is the charge I guess all new people at Pratt & Whitney need to step up to. So I say to you, good luck.